Hey, Amelia.
Hey, Janine.
I'm going to go check out a movie. Want to come?
Sure.
You're a little nervous?
I'm a little I really can't stress that enough. I am a little nervous. I'm really excited. I'm a little nervous. I know we're going to do okay. I know that the stakes are low. Now I'm at a point where I've put so much pressure on myself. I want to give you just the best of me.
We're serious. It's serious business.
I'm feeling extremely earnest right now. I'm feeling really earnest. I'm I want to do a good job and I care too hard.
Everybody needs to give us a good grade at podcasting.
I know. And it's why do I feel that way, Grace?
We need an A+.
We need an A+.
We need
Everybody
A+.
like us.
Okay. Welcome to this episode of Check Out Cinema, a podcast where we check out movies from the local library and review them. Yay! That's
Episode 2. That's
Episode
us.
2, which was the best Star Wars, which we actually have a Star Wars connection here. Wait, hold on. Let me be clear. It's not Episode 2 that's the best Star Wars. I'm talking about the second episode of the trilogy, so the original second movie. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, and I swear that's relevant because we have a little bit of a Star Wars connection in the movie we chose today, which was The Long Goodbye, which Amelia chose.
So the movie we're discussing today is Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye, starring Elliott Gould, Nina Van Paludan, and Sterling Hayden. I don't think I pronounced her name correctly. But this is an adaptation of Raymond Chandler's famous Philip Marlowe detective novel, The Long Goodbye. The two share a similar title, although they do not share a similar plot, and we'll talk about that as well. We'll go ahead and clear up Janine's connection from Star Wars to Long Goodbye. The screenplay of this film, this adaptation, is written by Lee Brackett. She wrote the script for The Empire Strikes Back.
Right, which is the one that I was referencing. It's episode 5, but it's the second of the trilogy.
Episode.
So she worked on the original screenplay, but unfortunately passed before it went into production. But for many of her other films that she worked on, she was known as the Queen of the Space Opera, which is a very appealing title, and I definitely want to dive into more of her work, but it's not immediately relevant for this episode.
We're kind of keeping in tradition with our first episode, The Wind, as that was a silent film adaptation of a novel by Dorothy Scarborough. This is a adaptation of another novel as well. So it looks like we've got ourselves a little bit of a series on adaptations from book to film.
Which is a pretty good theme for a library podcast, if you ask me.
But you know how sometimes you can be a little let down by the adaptation. So the reason why we chose this the reason why we chose this movie is because I had just finished Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye. I'm on a bit of a pulpy crime novel kick. Pulp crime novels serve as the basis and inspiration behind the genre of film noir. So it all just seems like perfect timing. And it was my turn to pick, and I just really love this movie, and I wanted to talk about it some more, and I wanted Janine to see it. And I was hoping that she would enjoy it, and I think she did.
Yeah, I did enjoy it, but I'm interested in your recent desire to read more mystery novels. I'm kind of wondering if it's seeping into your life. Are you talking a lot more about dames? Have you had the urge for a cigarette?
I do. I do like to refer to, everyone as, guys and dolls. And, there's always some sort of a mystery to solve.
Well, she walked into my podcast studio, all legs.
Of all the podcast studios in all of the world, and she has to come into mine.
The podcast studio being sitting on the floor in a living room.
It's my detective agency headquarters. We're going to solve the mystery of why this movie is so good and what makes a good adaptation and what makes a film noir and what makes a film neo-noir. Lots of mysteries to solve. So, Janine, was there anything that you knew about this movie going into it before we watched it? Did you have any thoughts or opinions on it? Had you been told anything about it before?
No, actually, I went into this totally blind, which is the way that I normally like to watch movies. Actually, I'm kind of strange about movies. We talked about this before. I don't care about being spoiled, like, which I know you say is...
I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I don't like reading other people's emotions onto my viewing experience.
And I will say I don't like hearing what other people think about a movie before I watch that. Like that, I'm kind of like, you let me decide if the movie's bad or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Don't tell me this is really bad or this is really good. Yeah.
But I went into this movie not really knowing what to expect. I did read the first couple of chapters of The Long Goodbye, and I meant to read more, but actually it kind of set me up well for watching the movie because the diversion between plot kind of happened at the point where I stopped reading, according to you. So yes. That kind of works, honestly, because I could see the reflections of the book narrative in the beats of the opening of the film, but it was just so different, and I really enjoyed that. And we learned a little bit about the production of the movie, which, as we mentioned, Lee Brackett worked in the screenplay. She also wrote the screenplay for The Big Sleep, which is based on another Raymond Chandler novel, and I have seen The Big Sleep. So from what we've read and understood about the creation of this film, she had already been involved with the character of Philip Marlowe, because Philip Marlowe is a repeating character between the two novels. But it's now been like 15, 20 years since the last time she wrote this character. And she just said he didn't really have a place in this modern world. So she wrote a script that really deviated from the plot. And Robert Altman loved it. He reportedly said that she better not change the ending. And it was really a very enjoyable film. And because I didn't really know where things were going, I think it kept me engaged the whole time.
How would you summarize in your words, given the fact that you had some sort of prior knowledge, or at least some sort of initial understanding of the novel and the story? How would you describe this film?
I think there's probably a way I would have described it before I had learned a little bit more about the production of the film. One thing that's really nice about checking out a movie from the library is, unlike when you would check out movies from like Blockbuster or what was that, Redbox? You remember those?
I remember those.
Yeah, like R.I.P.
The vending machine. The movie vending machine.
I've actually heard, side note, that since they've gone out of business, some people have managed to crack open the Redbox machines and just like take the DVDs. So I'm not encouraging people to do that, but I've heard that it is possible. Anyway, in those rental DVDs, a lot of those would not have the special features, the bonus features. I remember checking out movies and being disappointed that I couldn't actually access those. But that hasn't been the case with any of the library movies I've checked out so far, which makes me wonder if maybe they have a different process. Like, because from knowing how books are brought into the library, from having done that work briefly when I was working as like a library assistant, I imagine that they get to purchase and then bring into the collection a different type of DVD. Like, it's not this, it's more like the consumer Blu-ray or DVD, which is cool, because all of that to say, there were special features included in this copy of The Long Goodbye. And in the special features was a chapter they called Rip Van Marlowe, which was their summation of the character of Philip Marlowe in this adaptation. Just like Brackett had said that there's not really a place for this sort of detective character in the modern landscape, it is literally, what if Philip Marlowe just woke from a deep sleep 15 to 20 years after the last time he had been on the big screen? The way that I would summarize it now, knowing that and knowing the intention behind Elliott Gould's character, is literally that. Like, this is a private eye from the 1950s transposed into a new landscape of the 1970s, navigating the same sort of challenges that one would have in the 1950s, but with a new type of outlook on the crime from those involved in it. Because he's still got his understanding of crime and gangsters and policing from the 1950s, but it's a world he doesn't belong to anymore. So immediately the interaction with the cops it's different than in the novel, even though in the novel it's very efficient writing when he writes about the way the cops treat him and how he's treated in the jail. And you see echoes of that, but it's even crueler than it was then, even if it's not as physically violent. It's more the immediacy of not being given any benefit of the doubt. than in just the actions of the characters. They're more cynical, they're more violent, and it's because it's a shifting landscape. And then that in turn corrupts Marlowe.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting because I don't know how I would have described it. I mean, there was only a very brief window between watching the movie and seeing that. But I was like, oh, it all clicks now. Everything makes sense now with this understanding of Rip Van Marlowe. Do you know anything about that before you watched the movie?
No. So, see, this time that we watched it together, so I had only seen it once before. I saw the movie first. And then later on, I came around to reading the novel. And then I was like, oh, man, now I've got to watch the movie again to do a fun little like compare and contrast. I'll share the feelings from the first viewing and my thoughts about this story being told to me for the first time. Mm-hmm. I saw this as and I like wrote this out, so that's why things are a little kind of zippy. Mm-hmm. So private detective Philip Marlowe does a favor for a friend, and in return for said favor, he's beaten, jailed, deceived, beaten some more, and caught in the middle of not one but two murders and suicides. Can he solve his way out of this one, or is this long goodbye a final farewell for our dear Marlowe?
A little round of applause for that. Yeah. That's some good podcasting right there.
So
you're on the A+ track. I'm on kind of the B- right now.
Okay. So this was a pretty straightforward mystery, betrayal, double cross, and tested friendships and alliances. Marlowe is a detective. He's a private eye, keeps a very solitary life, save for his best friend, his cat. But as you said, he encounters this mystery, this sort of seemingly straightforward missing persons case. Find this writer, Roger Wade, on behalf of his wife, and bring him home. Mm-hmm. Unbeknownst to him, there's this whole other mystery happening with his friend, Terry Lennox. They've been friends for a very long time, and he does a favor for Terry. It seems as though Terry and his wife, Sylvia, are at odds, and he just needs to get away from his wife, so he gives his friend a ride. These are pretty innocuous, typical, everyday goings-on, or, at least we can expect these are typical goings-on for a private detective. And then suddenly the police are knocking at his door. Gangsters are knocking him out and dragging him around his house. Things escalate so quickly, and nothing is so straightforward. And as you mentioned, he's got this fish out of water, like he was asleep for so long, and he's woken up in this world of free love, of, beautiful, hippy-dippy, half-naked women, these criminals, these hoods that are much, much tougher and much more erratic and more violent than the kind of thugs he had probably been dealing with in the past, with more overt violence that really make him question people's character and morality in this world. Nothing is so straightforward. He's certainly at odds with it. So that special feature, that Rip Van Marlowe, I would say I agree with you that is sort of the key to understanding why there's this sort of like point of like sticky tension with like how Marlowe doesn't really mesh or gel in this world. And since he's a private detective, and of the like gumshoe variety that, follows his gut, his intuition. Clues aren't really, fingerprints on a murder weapon. Clues are sort of that like person-to-person connection. Right. More to do with questionable characters and morality than with cold, hard facts. Some things that I noticed on the second watch were the police, like how technologically advanced the police are. They fingerprint him.
Yeah.
They read him his Miranda rights. Yeah. Like, that's a big thing. And it's like, this is not 1940s and 50s police procedural or film noir that we're so used to seeing. This is something completely new, and this is something different.
And I think that's like a efficient deviation from his character in the novel, because as far as I got in the novel, which admittedly was not very far, even though I really do want to finish reading it, it was just it didn't happen for terms of time. You get a very good understanding of who he is, and he's, at least in the beginning, he's like I've seen this all before type thing. Like in his interactions with Terry Lennox, who's the character who the mystery is kind of centered on, he understands who he is and the type of person he is before the person even does anything. Now, it is kind of written from a looking back at it type thing. So hindsight is 20/20, of course. Even his back and forth with the cops, like there's echoes of it in the movie adaptation where he kind of like is sarcastically sparring with them. But he doesn't really seem to have as much of the upper hand as I think he did in the book.
Yeah, I would agree. like there does seem to be this sort of, his character in the novel has so much control over everyone and everything. And then Elliott Gould, who I think plays such an interesting Marlowe. It's not that rough, low talking Humphrey Bogart tough guy. There's kind of like there's something sort of like bouncy, kind of like, he's kind of gangly. I mean, Elliott Gould is so tall, you know, very statuesque and everything, but there's this kind of like loose quality that he's still sort of like giving the same sort of, you know, wise guy cracks and remarks. And you could get away with that in the 40s and the 50s, but now it's the 70s and nobody likes it, and they'll knock you out and they'll let you know. So it's so funny how, you know, you watch him apply those tried and true methods that, again, you would expect from this smooth talking, like chain smoking gumshoe. And then when, you know, confronted with this modern world of the 70s, it doesn't work. He's not at home.
But he still has that resilience that makes him a good detective. And I think that's what really speaks so well to his character, is even though he may not understand the landscape, that's still that person-to-person connection you were talking about. What really drives him as a detective, that is still there. And I think that's really efficient. And, you know, when you watch this one, it's like he gets into the headlines just like he did in the novel, because he's tied up in this whole Terry Lennox and his wife, like this murder that's happened. And he's named as a suspect early on. And then suddenly he gets that call from Elaine, you know, to go check on her husband. And first you're like, well, why is he doing this? Why is it? It's like, oh, this is what a PI does.
They get called on jobs all the time.
Especially from a wife who doesn't know where her husband is. That's like a PI's bread and butter. You know, it's like, so it's interesting like how it gets woven in so easily. And they do end up having that connection. Like the two plots are intertwined beyond the connection of Philip Marlowe.
And at first you wouldn't know. You
right.
It
seems like you've almost left the story when they're introduced.
Yeah, like it's like, and forget about that. That little murder, that suspected
yesterday's news.
Yeah, that's old. You're bringing up old stuff. It doesn't matter. But anyways, there are plenty other things that we can talk about, and there's a lot that I want to get into before we get sort of lost and bogged down.
Take it away.
We talk a lot about this is a genre deviation. What is the genre? Like, what does that mean, and how does it subvert this genre? So
wait, hold on, before you get into it, I want to talk about what I know as somebody who doesn't know what noir is, so we can build that. We can kind of show like the difference, because I think that would be fun.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say off the top of my head, as somebody who has not watched a lot of noir movies, I'm going to come with this, what the average person may think a noir is. So when I think of a noir, I obviously think black and white. Like,
absolutely.
Which this movie is not black and white, but you know, the early iterations are. I think of a gumshoe, a detective. I think of the, you know, I joked about the she walked into the office all legs. You know, I think of like, there has to be a femme fatale. There has to be this kind of woman who is involved in the plot, either brings the plot or, you know, is the target of a plot. I think of those sort of elements. I do think of a darkness. So that's what I think the average person would know about a noir. So take it away and tell us what a noir really is and its definition.
That understanding that you have is, that's plenty. Those are some of the, touchstones, the motifs that would help to classify a noir, a black and white mystery where there are these actually iconic characters. I feel like people throw around the word icon and iconic, but a private eye, rough and tough, hard-boiled, hardened by life circumstances. They've been kicked around. They've been beaten. It's that resiliency of character that you mentioned that Marlowe has. There's the femme fatale. She is the romantic interest of the gumshoe, or she's also a double cross, this sort of honeypot that muddies the water and can, if a hard-boiled isn't careful, he can succumb to her feminine wiles. But these are stories where the private detective, he exists on the fringes of the police and society, this outsider that observes. There's always an urban setting. That grittiness of urban life sort of seeps into everything, and there's, what's in the city. There's crime and drugs and gambling and easy virtue, all of the bad things happen in the city, and he exists on the fringes of society and is typically the victim of a corrupt system of justice, and he realizes that he is not so outside of that as he once thought he was. So a noir is also can be confined to a time frame, 1945 to 1955, that sort of post-World War II time frame, where the world is a dark and painful place that people are trying to navigate their way out of. Now there's noir, and then there's neo-noir. As someone who enjoys noir film, I don't like the phrase neo-noir, because then I think that it further subdivides a genre in a way that I think is unnecessary. I think just calling everything noir much more inclusive. One, it provides more opportunity for further study in the genre, and it just also gives a sense of continuity, that noir is not so stagnant as the iconography would suggest, that it is mutable and that it can fit and can't exist outside of its, temporal time frame. So this would be considered a neo-noir, as it's in the 70s, as there are those sort of recognizable characters, like Eileen Wade is meant to be our femme fatale. Philip Marlowe is our hard-boiled. There's the heavy and the hood. That's Marty Augustine, the erratic and violent money lender. There's the thugs, they're all so recognizable, but being dropped into the 70s, everybody sort of takes on a different quality.
Almost cartoonish.
Yeah. So it's like it parodies and satires the genre, but also subverts it in such a way that if you are someone who is familiar with noir and with mystery, you would think that you've got this movie figured out. You've seen them. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. But you haven't. You haven't seen a noir quite like this. We're missing something like voiceover narration.
Oh, yeah. And that was really impressive. I think that he definitely pulls in the elements of the classic noir, like you're saying, but he is also very aware of how dated those are, and he brings it into this 1970s. Like, he literally pulls Philip Marlowe out of then and just drops him there. And I like what you said about, you don't really like the delineation between noir and neo-noir, because I think it sticks noir in that old era. And I think that this is like really an effective film to talk about that, because he's literally dragged in like from the 1950s. And I, going into this blind, like not really knowing what was going to happen or all the twists and turns, there are definitely parts where you're like, oh, okay, I know what's going to happen next. Again, we're not going to really go beat by beat for this one because it's just got so many twists and turns, but there is a part where towards the end of the film where, like, I guess the great mystery or sort of deception is being brought to light. Philip Marlowe is driving in the car with these two police officers from Tijuana. He's kind of figuring out that they were bought off, that they were kind of paid to push this certain narrative, but there's no voiceover narration there, like you were just mentioning, which would have been how a lazy movie would have done it. Having like, I was driving with the two dirty cops who took my money and told me da-da-da. There's something like that. You get these shots of the car going up the road and you kind of hear him talking them into telling him what really happened. And it's very effective and done very well. And in my head, I already knew, even though I didn't know from reading the book, I just know from paying attention to the movie that he had probably faked, and he being Lennox had faked his suicide. I could just feel it because there was already the establishment earlier when he had gone to Tijuana and he had seen the pictures of the crime scene. There was no scar, and they had done a good job at the beginning of the movie showing the scar on Lennox's face, which was touched on in the novel but looked different because these were like fresh scars versus aged scars in the novel. So when you see the photographs of the crime scene and there's no scars on his cheek, immediately your little like light bulb goes off, right? Like, oh, there's something wrong here. And so they bring that back at the end and you're like, oh, okay, so he's going to figure out this was all a fake and then he's going to go confront him. And that happens, but then the ending is such a subversion of expectations. I don't know. It was just so efficient, so good. And I can see why Altman really clung on to that particular plot point, that he was like, we can, go through edits of the script, but I love the ending and it needs to stay that way.
It's a complete upheaval of the person that we know Marlowe to be, because his friend has turned on him, and he in turn turns on his friend. He does the same to him. And it seems as though Marlowe is such a principled man, that he stuck up for Terry, that he vouched for Terry, that he refused to rat on Terry, and in turn spent 3 days in jail over this, out of friendship, out of that loyalty to his long-term friend, and how easy it was for his friend to abandon him. It seems as though Marlowe has been corrupted by this new world that he's dropped into, and he's pulled the trigger, and he wants out.
Right, and I think there's always a bit of cynicism inherent in the noir genre. Like, you're talking about the post-war kind of like understanding how do you deal with terrible acts, things like that. But there's still a 1950s optimism. I think that's just permeating. Oh, sure, yeah. Right? And that optimism is not here. It is in some ways, and I think when he leaves the final confrontation, you can see a little bit of that spring in his step.
Yeah, he clicks his heels, and it starts to play, the musical motif switches to Hooray for Hollywood. This does a really good job of also breathing life into this Hollywood, or LA is also a character in this film. LA is the city itself is also a character, as it's not just the setting, it's also, the backdrop upon which this is the backdrop that this is set in, but LA is a city, and its
culture too.
And its culture, its film culture, is the homage is there. I was thinking about the security guard, the literal gatekeeper to this Malibu neighborhood. How you have to get his impressions, and if you get his old Hollywood impressions, you get to go inside. It's that elite sort of cultural elitism is there, and Hollywood as a character, as an entity.
And Marlowe's character is so, again, like what we said, fish out of water. And he really is that. He's such a contrast to the other people and the culture that's shown in these 1970s LA setting. And I think in particular, one of the most effective ways that this is done is that we mentioned that Eileen is sort of that classic femme fatale character, but there's no sexual tension at all.
None.
Between Marlowe and Eileen. There's no sexual tension there. There's no oh, he's attracted to her, that's why he's trying to figure this out for her. He's just doing his job, and it's the same sort of removal of sexuality, of kind of he's a sexless character, I think, in some ways. There's no point in this movie where you have that kind of a relationship kind of lorded over him. He's navigating this world individually, he's always been an individual. And I think that's highlighted by consistently throughout the movie, when several times he returns to his apartment and he has these neighbors. The apartment design is just really fantastic. And I think it so efficiently speaks to his character,
Of it all.
Oh yeah, above LA, above this setting, in this strange sort of, there's an elevator that goes to the floor, the essentially, top floor, yeah. And there's two sections that split from the elevator, and there's his apartment, and then across the way are the apartments of these young women that Amelia mentioned earlier, who they are always on display in some way. They're often without their shirts, they're doing yoga, they're
acrobatics, flips,
right,
everything.
They're experimenting with drugs, they're kind of embracing this new era. And he is such a contrast to that. He walks by in his suit with his American flag tie, and he doesn't even seem bothered by what they're displaying. In fact, he's more worried about his cat, who was also introduced early on in this film, but disappears really quickly. And I think it's so interesting because the movie keeps reminding you of the cat, but doesn't show you the cat again. And one of the first things I said when we finished watching the movie was, what does the cat mean?
Yeah, that got some gears turning in me, because when I watched it, I didn't think about the cat at all. I mean, I certainly missed him, and I adored Marlowe's devotion as a cat father. He's asking everybody, can you look out for my cat? He asked the girls, can you guys watch for my cat? I'm going to be gone a few days. He'll come back. And so when you said that, I was suddenly oh yeah, what about it? What do you think? And so I turned some ideas over. Now, I have some ideas. I would like to share them before, because I really want you to teach me what you learned and, share with me what you learned about the cat. So my interpretation, given your prompt, is that Marlowe is the cat. The cat behaves in ways that Marlowe does, or at least should behave. I started thinking, and I kind of laughed at myself, this cat won't be fed. He won't be fed lies.
Yeah.
And so Marlowe is trying to pass off this one brand of cat food as the name brand cat food that his cat prefers. And his cat can see right through the ruse, right through the double cross, and refuses to be fed this lie. And instead he leaves. He listens to some sort of instinct and he realizes the whole thing is crooked and wrong, and it just leaves. And Marlowe sort of does the same. He realizes that he's being fed some sort of lies, and and he investigates and he pokes and he prods and he gets up in there and upsets the whole thing. But is what they say, curiosity killed the cat.
Yeah, and I agree very much with you. I think that the cat is a very succinct metaphor for Philip Marlowe. As you mentioned in this beginning, you get this, very effective scene that focuses on understanding who Philip Marlowe is. Because when I was watching this, I was like, this is nothing like how it starts in the novel.
Right.
I'm waiting for the friendship to be just shown between Lennox and Marlowe to build that. But that's not really the focus of the movie or the story. Lennox is kind of like a sub to all of the plot and the development. What the movie then does is let's tell you who Philip Marlowe is. And so we see this as a man who is almost cartoonishly devoted to his cat. When he goes to the store to look for this cat food brand that his cat likes, he's kind of this expectation that the person in the grocery store should understand, he cannot get a different brand of cat food. He has to get the cat food that his cat wants.
Yeah.
This is not a you can't talk me out of this. But he's well, I guess I can just try and make it work. And it doesn't. And then the cat leaves and we never see the cat again. There's no cat in the background. There's nothing like that. We never see the cat again. And so there's this conspicuous absence of the cat. And the reason why I noticed the cat was because they keep bringing it up. Like you said, whenever he comes home, he's I'm looking for my cat. Have you ladies seen my cat? Can you keep an eye out for my cat? And then I think most importantly, and what really brought me back to that moment, to that idea, was that in that final confrontation between Philip Marlowe and Terry Lennox, he brings up the cat. Right before he shoots Terry Lennox, he has a line about his cat. And so it's clearly the movie wants us to remember the cat is a part of understanding who Philip Marlowe is. Now, what do we think of when we think of cats, right? We think of independence.
Right.
You don't really have a cat so much of a cat tolerates you.
Yes.
Right? And that cat drew his boundary. The cat was you're going to lie to me, I'm going to leave. And I think that's the same thing that Philip Marlowe does.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's such a neat and nifty little shorthand, and again, that in itself, him having this sort of animal companion or this animal familiar, is not at all like any other hard-boiled or film noir would ever take time to depict. What does it matter that this detective has a pet and notwithstanding a pet that he loves and cares for? That is so against the norm for these hard-boileds, because it's also there's kind of a show of emotionality there that we wouldn't really get. They're so flat and one note, but we have some character complexities. He's kind of a sweetheart, that Marlowe, a secret sweetheart. Did you have any feelings before, during, or after? Anything that was stirred up in you as you watched?
Well, I think that there were some really effective scenes in terms of cinematic tension. And there are parts where you're anticipating something to happen because the movie is driving up the tension. Now, there are these interpersonal conflicts. And we know Eileen and her husband, Roger, that they have had domestic disputes before.
Yes.
When we're introduced to Eileen, she does have a bruise on her cheek. So there is this kind of concern later on when you get to meet Roger and he raises his voice to Eileen. There's this tension. I'm is he going to hit her again?
Yes.
Because we've already established that in that character. Now, we never see Roger hit Eileen. We never see Roger have that sort of physical violence. Now we see an emotional violence. Like he yells at her, he manipulates her, he has these expectations for her, and she's clearly got this kind of wincing, sort of reaction to his words. Like she's expecting him to do something. And almost this point when we're all expecting him to do something, he then leaves to go speak instead with Philip Marlowe. Again, kind of subverting what we would expect. And similarly, one of the thugs, well, really the main thug, the guy who's looking for his money.
Marty
Augustine, yeah. He has this horrible, violent scene with his mistress, whom he strikes across the face with a glass Coke bottle. Oof. And so when she is reintroduced, she now has like headgear, she's got bandages, but Augustine says, it's all going to be okay. And he brings her into the room while he's intimidating Philip Marlowe because he's looking for his money. And he brings out this mistress who is all but shivering in fear, sits her down on the couch while he's trying to impress to Philip Marlowe that he needs honesty. Because he's saying, like, I bared it all in front of this woman. I apologized to her for my actions. But the whole time, I'm, like clenching my fists, like, waiting for him to hit her again. Because that's what, you're kind of expecting in this moment. That he's going to, just like he did in the previous scene, cart her out as, like, a third party to this whole ordeal. Someone who's largely innocent, in terms of what's going on here. And then just hits her. And he even says, like, why did I do that? Like, she didn't have anything to do with this. I should have hit you instead. And so you've already got this established. So you're just like cringing, waiting. Is he going to do it again? Is he going to hit her again? Is he going to do something worse? And then all tension diffuses suddenly.
Yeah. With this hilarious sort of, let's all take our clothes off and let's all be completely naked and honest and true.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger's there.
Oh, yeah. That's important to note. This is like one of his first uncredited roles, and he's a tank. I wonder, they're like, let's all get naked. Arnold, you first.
Yeah.
No, maybe not. I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But no, that is just that, like, there's, again, that subversion, it takes all the tension out.
It becomes comedic.
It becomes comedic. And again, what comedy is there in a film noir? None. It's all so serious. And, you mentioned that overt violence, this subverts sexuality and violence as well. In noir, sexuality is much more in the forefront. These male characters are very, like, wolfishly chasing these women. The femme fatale, her sexuality is on display. And then the violence is sort of something that happens off screen. Now, we know a lot of that is because of Hays Code, of course. If you're not familiar with the Hays Code, it was the set of rules and regulations, sort of like parental controls on film that made it appropriate, and then we have the rating system, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need to go into all of that. But to subvert sexuality and violence, to sort of flip the script on that, sexuality is still on display, but there's no sort of advances or overt gestures made in the direction of these sexual impulses, but it's the violent impulses that are given space and that are acted out completely on screen. That was an horrific thing I had ever seen. And to watch her writhe around on his couch and, like, the blood pouring from her, I'm so sorry to get so gruesome, but that's how gruesome it gets. Yeah. And that's why you're so queasy watching.
And what's interesting too is there's, throughout this film, there are these clever sort of, like, there's no detail that's just put there for its own sake.
Yeah.
There are things that return over and over again. And when she's, like, running with this blood streaming down her face, she, like, basically runs in front of a car at one point, and it, like, interrupts the flow of the action because they're like, Chase, get her back here, get her back in the car, But that kind of idea happens over and over again. And early on, when he's first driving to go meet Elaine, I believe, or maybe when he's trying to track down Roger, he is, like, driving down the street, and I think a dog walks in front of his car. Yeah, he slows down. He's like, I gotta get the dog out of the car. Beep, 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 get the dog out of the car. Then there's the woman who, is running around in front of the car and interrupts the car in the traffic. And then when Marlowe escapes this confrontation with the thugs who are looking for their money because the money is miraculously dropped into their lap, he decides to go chase the car to find out who it is. And it's revealed that it's Elaine that brings the cash back to those people. And then he gets hit by a car. And so it's funny how there's this like car motif going back and forth, like, you know, and about cars are like part of the transportation, part of the action, but then also still like a thing that can kill you, you know?
Like a fly caught in this on like a fly on a windshield, bug on a windshield. And also something consistently reoccurring is the theme song of The Long Goodbye.
Yeah.
You notice that musical motif. The main theme of this movie, it has this original score. I can't recall the lyrics to it right now, but it
says The Long Goodbye.
It says The Long Goodbye. It's The Long Goodbye. It's a goodbye and it's long and it's the long goodbye. And it's replayed in it's
in different genres.
It'll
like
be
in
jazz,
a mariachi,
crooner, mariachi. It's
funeral procession.
It's everything. It's reused and repurposed and reworked, and it's this reoccurring theme. And then it's not the theme that closes out the film.
Yeah. The repetition of themes, I think, is what makes this movie so smart. It's also a movie that makes you feel smart, I think, as you're watching it, you know, either because you think you've solved it before everyone else has, or also when you notice these recurring motifs, recurring images. There's this great juxtaposition between two scenes that focus on the interactions between Roger, Eileen, and Philip Marlowe. When we're first introduced to their dynamic with Eileen and Roger's dynamic, we've been introduced to them separately, but we haven't seen them together. Philip Marlowe has exited the apartment or the house, the condo that they're in, and you can see his image through this glass door leading onto the beach. And while they're talking, he is almost being focused in on, like, it does this it's really technologically very impressive.
Yeah.
Like it essentially like goes through and like to this blurred image and then brings him back into focus, like kind of like he can't hear any of this. He doesn't know what's going on, but we're still, as the audience, being focused onto him. And then you juxtapose that with like a later scene where he's kind of trying to look back into this house and to learn information he's not supposed to be privy to. And all you can hear is the ocean surf. And you see the people talking inside, but you don't get to hear what they're saying. And it's like it's just such a clever thing. Like, we can only know as much as he will allow us to know. And we're still rooted with Marlowe like you are in a detective novel. Yes. Like, you know, you only know as much as the detective does. But a movie, that's not how a movie works. But they're still reminding you that Philip Marlowe is there. And then you kind of get a call back again to this window, like to the beach, when Roger is having this essentially like stressed reaction, this mental breakdown to everything that's going on, to his interactions with his doctor, to his relationships, all those things, and he decides to take his own life. And you get this recurring theme of the window, of the beach, of the noise. It's just really so effective and so well done. Even if you don't understand the movie, I think it's just an enjoyable experience. There are movies that are beautiful and then also you don't really want to watch them again. Like, there are lots of movies like that. I was like, wow, this is really pretty, but the movie was boring. Yeah. There are movies that have really interesting scenes or really interesting stories but are not shot well. And this is a movie that has both of those elements. It's shot well and it has an interesting story. It makes you think. It makes you appreciate the art of cinematography. It apparently uses this technique called flashing, which I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do recommend looking up the American cinematographer article about flashing and about its use in this film, because it basically discusses how they were able to get this kind of dreamy pastel look to kind of recall the 50s into the 70s by exposing the film in a different way than usual. Like, there's just so much careful thought put into the film that is what makes it, like, you appreciate it. You know, you really appreciate it as a viewer, as a person who likes films, but also, like, it doesn't treat you like an idiot.
It's very refreshing.
It is refreshing. And I think it's interesting what you said about the Hays Code, honestly, because, you know, you talk about subversion, right? You know, what do you expect to happen? The Hays Code, in many of its rules, required people to be creative, because once there were these rules made, then you had to find the way to get around them. But one of the rules from the Hays Code is this idea that justice must prevail. The good guys must win. And at the end of this film, you see that Terry Lennox has basically escaped all downfall, all fallout from the crime that he committed, which was absconding with money, which was, you know, killing his wife, was getting involved with this other woman. Yeah. All of those things. He's just relaxing in Tijuana. He's having a great time until Elliott Gould's Philip Marlowe, you know, comes up and says, like, hey, what are you doing here, man? You know, like, you don't even care about all this stuff that's happened. And he doesn't take him to the police. No, he takes it into his own hands. And so does justice prevail? Maybe. You know, does it? Like, because we've kind of established Terry Lennox isn't a good guy, but was it right for Philip Marlowe to take that into his own hands? You could argue, like, well, it could fit the Hays Code, because really, like, justice does win.
Yeah.
Like, the good guy wins, and there's not a large display of sexuality. And American cinema has always been more comfortable showing violence against women than sexuality with women. So it kind of does fit a couple of those highlights, or at least makes you recall them, which I think is what this whole movie is meant to do, is to make you recall the morality of the 1950s or the filmmaking of the 1950s, while still very much reminding you that it is the modern day.
That is a really good point. This Hays Code hangover, something to think about. Wow.
Well, would you recommend it?
Would I recommend it? I recommended it to you. I recommend it to anybody that has 2 eyes and 2 ears.
And it's your second watch,
it's
right?
It's my second watch, so it was worth the checkout.
Worth the rewatch.
Worth the rewatch.
Worth checking it out a little bit longer, maybe than you're supposed to.
Yeah, worth maybe the late fee, the late charges.
Watch it once, then invite all your friends to come watch it again with you and act really smart the whole time because you already know what's going on. Yeah, I thought the movie was very fulfilling to watch. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely something that stuck with me afterwards. It was something that also, I love a movie that invites a discussion. Mm-hmm. I think a movie that gives you all the answers is something that maybe you might have fun watching in the moment, but it doesn't give you anything to think about later.
Yeah.
Whereas this movie really does. It invites you to really consider all parts of the movie and all of the characters and the way they interact with each other. And there's also questions that linger because it doesn't explain everything to you. So I really did have a good experience with this film. And I think I learned a lot about how to effectively move a character out of an era. And rather than like trying to make sure that it has the same appeal, kind of talk about why doesn't he have the same appeal? Like, why wouldn't a straightforward detective movie work in the 1970s? And why wouldn't it work today? It's how Lee Brackett said was that we know how a 1950s detective works. That doesn't work in the modern day where we expect everything they have to say. That character doesn't work anymore. And I think that's even true today. I don't think you could do a 1950s detective in 2025. But if you were smart enough, you could find a way to bring a 1950s detective into 2025. And that's what Robert Altman did.
I agree with all of that. For me, this is one that has not left me since I've seen it either. The discussion is endless. The connection, person to person, character study that this offers and invites is vital and essential to the viewing process. If you're looking for further reading or recommendations film-wise, do you have anything that you would recommend? I would recommend, continuing to read more Raymond Chandler books, to read the Philip Marlowe books. You get such a sense for who Phil is as a detective and who he is as a person. I also recommend any other pulpy crime paperbacks, i.e. Dashiell Hammett and the Thin Man, Red Harvest, to get more of an idea for the hard-boiled detective in the 1940s and 50s.
Right. And I also think, of course, read The Long Goodbye. As you mentioned, the Philip Marlowe books. I think it's worth seeing the difference between the characters in the book and on the screen. There is a biography about Robert Altman by Mitchell Zuckoff called Robert Altman, The Oral Biography, which, if you wanted to learn a little bit more about Robert Altman and his approach to making movies, I really do recommend checking out the DVD and watching this bonus features because it has an interview with Robert Altman and also an interview with Elliott Gould. They're not really together, so it's kind of weird to say, like, it's not with the both of them, but it's intercut between their dialogue about essentially their memories and of the production of the film and even like the marketing of the film. One little extra tidbit was apparently they got the illustrator for Mad Magazine to make a poster after it had already premiered, I think, at some of like the larger cities, and they made this one, and that poster was so effective, it brought in so many people that they actually regretted not doing it earlier because they didn't really get a big welcome to this film. It didn't really have the numbers that they wanted until they had this like poster. And of course this Mad Magazine style is like kind of exaggerated features, you know, like caricature type thing.
I know the one you're talking about where it highlights the character connections. Like Marlo does this and this person does that. And it is like an introduction to the mystery. So people sort of are like, what is The Long Goodbye?
Yeah.
You know, they get an idea. It's like the poster itself is like a trailer for it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And so they have like a whole segment about that. And also there's this quote, and I tried my best to transcribe this quote because Robert Altman in his interview kind of rambles a little bit.
Oh,
us
too.
Yeah, I know. But I really like this, and I'm going to try to, basically from the way I understood it, this is what my transcription of his quote was. I don't direct, I watch. I see it. If I'm wowed, I know what it is, what I've got, because I'm excited. But if I meet one person who comes by on the beach and says, oh, I've never seen The Long Goodbye, I hear that was pretty good, you want to see it? I see it and look through that picture with that one person through the whole picture. Otherwise, I could have arranged so that I can press a button and I can see any film I've ever made at any time. I'd never look at them, but if I get one virgin in there and I can look through their eyes, it's worth it. Huh. Right, so this idea, like, he doesn't care about watching his movies over again, of dissecting his movies, of pulling apart every little piece. What he cares about is seeing somebody else experience it for the first time, which is what you got to do.
That's touching. That's what I got to do with you, and that's what we hope you all get to do following this episode. We hope that you all, you know, keep Robert Altman alive in your viewing, and you enjoy this first watch, the first experience, this long goodbye.
Oh, yeah, that was perfect. What a great ending. Oh, call us Robert Altman the way that we're ending this so well. No, don't do that. Well...
We need to subvert genre podcast expectations.
Unfortunately, you can't. You have to plug everything at the end of a podcast episode. It's how it works. So you can find us on Instagram at checkout_cinema. We are hosted through Spotify, but we are available on every podcast platform that you can think of. Hopefully, if we're missing on one, let us know and we'll make sure that we're on there. We are both employees of a library, but our views do not represent that of our employers. And you can also follow us individually on Letterboxd. I am Honeyed Life.
I am Amy Grindhouse.
And we don't care what you think about our reviews of movies. No, I'm just kidding. I actually don't really put a lot about reviews of my movies. I only write quotes because I'm too scared of saying what I think about a movie permanently on the internet. However, if you would like to actually appreciate somebody who puts real reflection into their reviews, then I highly recommend looking at Amelia's. Don't argue with me about my opinions, but you can argue with Amelia. She can actually back them up.
I would love to argue with anyone. No, I want to discuss. I want to connect. I want to grow. I want to have a dialogue with you via voiceover narration.
What's a podcast but a one-sided dialogue? Oh, well, I hope you guys are talking back to us while you're listening to this and arguing with us. That would actually be really good. Or agreeing with us.
Or agreeing with us. We would take that.
Yeah. All right, well, that was the long goodbye. And hey, how about we both give a very long goodbye?
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Auf Wiedersehen, farewell.
Oh. We don't have the rights to that.
Oh, yeah.
Cut it.
Cut it off.